Throughout history, there has been an uncomfortable relationship between those who question official narratives and those who defend them. The phrase conspiracy theorist has become a convenient weapon to dismiss uncomfortable questions, silence inconvenient truths, and protect powerful interests from scrutiny. But what happens when the paranoid delusions turn out to be documented facts? What occurs when the impossible theories become undeniable reality? Today, we're examining 10 conspiracy theories that were ridiculed, dismissed, and attacked for years before being proven absolutely correct. These aren't fringe theories that accidentally got lucky. These are cases where systematic deception was exposed, where official denials crumbled under evidence, and where the people branded as conspiracy theorists were vindicated by history itself. Before we dive into these shocking stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button to support the channel and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's get into our first story. The Surveillance Ops Watergate. Political surveillance operations represent one of the most significant vindicated conspiracy theories in modern history. For years, political opponents claimed the highest levels of government were coordinating illegal activities, using intelligence agencies for partisan purposes, and conducting systematic cover-ups of criminal behavior. These accusations were dismissed as the desperate fantasies of sore losers who couldn't accept legitimate election results. The conspiracy theory emerged when burglars were caught installing listening devices at opposition headquarters during a presidential campaign. The arrested individuals had clear connections to intelligence agencies and the current administration. Official responses were swift and dismissive. This was merely a third-rate burglary carried out by overzealous campaign workers acting without authorization. Claims of high-level conspiracy were paranoid political attacks designed to undermine legitimate governance. Media coverage initially accepted this narrative. The idea that the administration had orchestrated the break-in was considered a baseless conspiracy theory promoted by partisan opponents. Two investigative journalists refused to accept the official story. They followed financial trails connecting the burglars to campaign funds and high-level officials. They cultivated sources within the administration who provided increasingly damaging information. Each revelation made the conspiracy theory harder to dismiss. Campaign officials were directly involved. Intelligence operatives had coordinated the operation. Money for the burglary came from official campaign accounts. But the most devastating discovery was the systematic cover-up that began immediately after the arrests. The administration had launched an extensive operation to destroy evidence, pay silence money to the arrested burglars, and use intelligence agencies to obstruct investigations. As evidence mounted, officials continued their denials while attacking the journalists as politically motivated and dismissing each revelation as distortion or coincidence. The smoking gun emerged in the form of secret recordings that captured the highest officials discussing the cover-up, approving payments to silence witnesses, and actively obstructing justice. When these recordings were subpoenaed, officials initially refused to release them. When forced to comply, they released heavily edited versions. Only when complete recordings were finally obtained did the full scope of the conspiracy become undeniable. The conspiracy was massive and systematic. Intelligence agencies had been weaponized for political espionage. The break-in had been authorized from the highest levels. The cover-up involved dozens of officials across multiple agencies. Crimes had been committed, evidence had been systematically destroyed, and the public had been deliberately deceived for years. Officials who had dismissed the conspiracy theory as paranoid political fantasy were revealed to be either complicit in the crimes or willfully ignorant of criminal activity happening around them. The scandal destroyed careers, led to criminal convictions, and ultimately forced the resignation of the highest official in the land. The conspiracy theory that had been ridiculed as impossible political attack was proven to be accurate reporting of systematic criminal activity at the highest levels of government. If you're shocked by what you just heard, you're not alone. And trust me, it only gets more disturbing from here. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the rest of these jaw-dropping revelations. Let's continue. The mass surveillance programs. Mass surveillance systems represent another conspiracy theory that seemed too paranoid to be true until classified documents proved every word was accurate. For decades, privacy advocates and technology experts warned that governments possess the capability and intention to monitor all digital communications. They claimed sophisticated computer systems were capturing every phone call, reading every email, and tracking all internet activity of ordinary citizens. These warnings were dismissed as the paranoid fantasies of technophobes who didn't understand how government actually operated. Officials provided carefully crafted non-denial denials. They insisted they didn't monitor citizens without proper legal authorization. When pressed directly about mass surveillance programs, they claimed they couldn't discuss classified matters, but strongly implied such programs didn't exist. The truth emerged when a government contractor released thousands of classified documents to journalists before fleeing the country to avoid prosecution. The documents revealed a surveillance apparatus that exceeded what even the most paranoid conspiracy theorists had imagined possible. Intelligence agencies were collecting telephone metadata on hundreds of millions of citizens, recording every call made, received, its duration and location. They were capturing internet traffic on a massive scale, storing billions of emails, chat messages, and web searches. They had developed programs specifically designed to break encryption and access supposedly secure communications. The conspiracy theory had claimed that major technology companies were secretly cooperating with government surveillance programs. The leaked documents proved that corporations had been compelled through secret court orders to provide backdoor access to user data. All had been forbidden by law from revealing that the surveillance programs existed. Most disturbing was the universal scope of the monitoring. This wasn't targeted surveillance of suspected criminals or terrorists. It was comprehensive collection of communications from every citizen. The surveillance apparatus made no distinction between innocent civilians and suspected threats. Everyone's private communications were swept up, analyzed, and permanently stored. The conspiracy theory had also predicted that parallel surveillance systems existed in allied nations specifically to circumvent domestic spying laws. The leaked documents confirmed this exact arrangement, revealing intelligence sharing agreements designed to allow agencies to spy on their own citizens through foreign partners. When the revelations broke, officials initially denied them completely, then minimized their scope, then finally attempted to justify them as necessary security measures. The whistleblower who exposed the programs was declared a traitor and forced into permanent exile. Despite the revelations, most surveillance programs continued operating with only minor modifications. What makes this vindicated conspiracy theory particularly chilling is its implications. If the government constructed a complete surveillance infrastructure in secret and denied its existence for years, what other impossible conspiracy theories might actually be documented government programs? The tobacco industry cover-up. The tobacco industry's deliberate concealment of health dangers represents one of the most systematically documented corporate conspiracies in history. For decades, tobacco companies maintained that cigarettes were harmless recreational products. When independent scientists began connecting smoking to cancer and other diseases, the industry claimed these findings were unproven speculation promoted by conspiracy theorists trying to destroy a legitimate business. The industry response was coordinated and sophisticated. They funded research studies designed to show cigarettes were safe. They recruited doctors to appear in advertisements endorsing smoking. They created front organizations that appeared independent but promoted industry messaging. They systematically attacked and ridiculed anyone who claimed tobacco products caused serious health problems. This strategy worked effectively for decades. Despite mounting independent evidence, the tobacco industry successfully maintained that the connection between smoking and cancer was unproven scientific speculation. The industry claimed that fears about smoking were paranoid conspiracy theories promoted by anti-business activists. The truth began emerging in the 1990s when whistleblowers came forward with damaging internal documents. But the real revelation came through a massive legal settlement that forced tobacco companies to release millions of pages of internal documents that had been carefully guarded for decades. These documents told a devastating story of systematic deception. Tobacco executives had known since the 1950s that cigarettes caused cancer. Their own internal research had confirmed the connection. Company scientists had repeatedly warned leadership about the health dangers of their products. Rather than warning the public or modifying their products, tobacco companies made a calculated business decision to hide the evidence and continue marketing cigarettes as safe. The documents revealed coordinated campaigns to manipulate public opinion and scientific understanding of tobacco's health effects. Industry executives met regularly to coordinate messaging strategies. They created supposedly independent research foundations that produced studies showing cigarettes were safe. They funded scientists who would publish papers questioning the cancer connection. They recruited medical professionals to appear in advertisements promoting smoking. Most damning were internal memoranda showing that executives knew they were deliberately deceiving the public. One document from the late 1960s stated explicitly that doubt was their product. The strategy was to create uncertainty about scientific evidence they knew was accurate, buying time to sell more cigarettes before regulations threatened their profits. The conspiracy theorists who had claimed tobacco companies were hiding evidence of health dangers were completely vindicated. The paranoid conspiracy theory was actually a carefully executed business strategy that resulted in millions of preventable deaths over several decades. The tobacco conspiracy's exposure fundamentally changed how we understand corporate deception. It established the playbook that would be used again and again by other industries facing inconvenient scientific evidence. Deny the research. Fund contradictory studies. Attack critics as conspiracy theorists. Create public doubt about established science. Delay regulation while maximizing profits from harmful products. What makes the tobacco case particularly significant is how it was finally exposed. The conspiracy ended only when internal documents were forced into public view through legal proceedings. Without those leaked memoranda and whistleblower testimonies, the deception might have continued indefinitely. How many similar conspiracies remain hidden because documents haven't been subpoenaed or insiders haven't broken ranks? The Prohibition alcohol poisoning. During the Prohibition era, another conspiracy theory emerged that seemed too sinister to believe. Rumors circulated that federal authorities were deliberately poisoning industrial alcohol supplies, knowing bootleggers would steal it and sell it as drinking alcohol. The government was allegedly willing to kill citizens who violated prohibition laws through systematic poisoning of alcohol supplies. These accusations were dismissed as absurd anti-government conspiracy theories. Officials denied the claims outright. They insisted that deaths from illegal alcohol were caused by careless bootleggers who didn't properly distill their products, not government policy. Media coverage portrayed concerns about government poisoning as paranoid fantasies from criminals upset that their illegal activities had dangerous consequences. The reality was more horrifying than the conspiracy theory suggested. Industrial alcohol was indeed being stolen by bootleggers and redistilled for human consumption. Rather than increasing enforcement efforts to prevent theft, federal authorities chose a different approach. They mandated that industrial alcohol be deliberately rendered more toxic through the addition of increasingly dangerous chemicals. Starting in the mid-1920s, government regulations required that industrial alcohol be denatured with methanol, which causes blindness and death. Benzene, a known carcinogen, was added along with various other poisonous compounds. Federal authorities knew that bootleggers were stealing this alcohol. They knew it would be consumed by humans. They mandated the addition of poisons anyway. Officials claimed the deadly additives would deter theft because bootleggers couldn't remove the dangerous chemicals. This justification was demonstrably false. Government experts knew that redistillation could remove some denaturants, but not completely. The alcohol would remain dangerous, but bootleggers would sell it regardless because customers had no alternatives. The policy represented deliberate deterrence through poisoning. Federal authorities calculated that if drinking illegal alcohol became deadly, people would stop consuming it. They accepted that thousands would die before the deterrent effect became clear. The deaths weren't accidental consequences of prohibition enforcement. They were intentional results of government policy. Medical examiners began documenting waves of alcohol poisoning deaths across the country. In major cities, hundreds died annually from consuming government-poisoned industrial alcohol. Nationwide estimates suggest at least 10,000 people died from deliberately contaminated alcohol during Prohibition. The conspiracy theory about government poisoning was completely accurate. The conspiracy remained hidden for decades after Prohibition ended. Only when researchers in the 1990s examined government archives did the full scope become clear. Internal memoranda showed officials knew the denaturants would kill people and considered the deaths an acceptable deterrent against prohibition violations. What makes this proven conspiracy particularly disturbing is the moral justification provided by officials. The victims were criminals who deserved their fate for violating federal law. This reasoning appears repeatedly in conspiracy theories about government wrongdoing. As this case demonstrates, sometimes that reasoning reflects actual government policy decisions. The pharmaceutical industry deception. Pharmaceutical companies face similar conspiracy theories for decades. Critics claim drug manufacturers were systematically hiding evidence that their products cause serious harm, prioritizing profits over patient safety. The industry responded with outrage, insisting that claims of systematic deception were paranoid anti-science conspiracy theories promoted by people who didn't understand medical research. The truth began emerging through court cases when patients harmed by prescription medications obtained internal company documents through legal discovery processes. Case after case revealed identical patterns. Companies possessed evidence that their drugs caused serious harm and deliberately concealed that evidence from doctors and patients. One particularly damning case involved a popular pain medication that was prescribed to millions of people. Internal documents revealed the company knew their drug significantly increased risks of heart attacks and strokes. Studies demonstrating this danger had been completed before the drug received regulatory approval. Rather than warning medical professionals and patients about these risks, the company buried the research and continued marketing the drug as safe. The medication remained on the market for years, prescribed to millions of patients who were never informed about the cardiovascular dangers. Conservative estimates suggest the drug caused tens of thousands of heart attacks and strokes that could have been prevented if the company had disclosed their safety data. The company eventually paid billions in legal settlements but never admitted wrongdoing. More court cases followed, revealing systematic patterns of evidence suppression across the pharmaceutical industry. Companies routinely conducted studies showing their drugs were dangerous or ineffective, then never published those studies in medical literature. Only positive results saw publication, creating completely distorted impressions of drug safety and effectiveness. This selective publication was exactly what conspiracy theorists had warned about for years. When half the studies about a medication show it doesn't work or causes harm, but only the positive half get published, doctors and patients receive fundamentally misleading information about treatment options. Internal documents exposed another deceptive practice called ghostwriting. Drug companies hired medical writers to produce research papers, then recruited academic physicians to put their names on the papers as authors. These publications promoted company products while appearing to be independent academic research. Medical journals unknowingly published industry propaganda disguised as objective science. One drug marketed specifically to teenagers had internal studies showing it was ineffective for adolescents and actually increased suicide risks. The company not only suppressed the negative studies but funded misleading papers suggesting the drug was safe for teenage patients. When families whose children had committed suicide filed lawsuits, internal documents revealed the company had known about suicide risks from the beginning. A prominent medical journal editor estimated that perhaps 50% of clinical trial data had never been published, specifically trials showing drugs were dangerous or ineffective. This wasn't speculation based on theoretical concerns. It was calculated from comparing registered clinical trials to published results in medical literature. What vindicated the conspiracy theorists most completely was discovering that this behavior continued despite massive legal settlements and regulatory penalties. The pharmaceutical conspiracy wasn't historical misconduct that had been corrected. It was ongoing business practice where billion-dollar drug sales justified million-dollar fines as acceptable business expenses. The people dismissed as anti-science conspiracy theorists were completely correct. Profit-motivated corporations were systematically hiding evidence of harm when disclosure threatened revenue streams. The conspiracy theory about pharmaceutical companies prioritizing profits over patient safety was documented business practice affecting millions of patients worldwide. The Tuskegee syphilis study, perhaps the most horrifying vindicated conspiracy theory, involves medical experimentation conducted on vulnerable populations without their knowledge or consent. For 40 years, government health officials conducted a study on untreated disease progression using impoverished citizens as unwitting test subjects. The men were told they were receiving free medical care for bad blood, a local term for various ailments. In reality, researchers wanted to study how a particular disease progressed without treatment. They recruited 600 men, nearly 400 of whom had the targeted disease. The subjects were never informed they had this condition. They were never given treatment Even when effective cures became widely available, researchers actively prevented them from receiving treatment elsewhere. When rumors circulated in affected communities about unethical medical experiments, officials dismissed these concerns as paranoid conspiracy theories rooted in historical mistrust rather than current reality. Medical authorities insisted all research followed strict ethical guidelines and that government doctors would never harm patients. The conspiracy continued for 4 decades. Men went blind, became mentally ill, and died from complications that could have been easily cured with readily available medications. Their wives contracted the disease through transmission. Their children were born with congenital infections. Throughout this period, government doctors monitored the progression, took detailed notes, and actively prevented treatment. When men tried to enlist in military service, where they would have received treatment as part of standard medical screening, researchers intervened to keep them out of the armed forces. The study was more important than the subject's health or their right to serve their country. The truth emerged in 1972 when a public health worker, horrified by what he had discovered, contacted journalists. What investigators uncovered was worse than any conspiracy theory had imagined. The study violated every principle of medical ethics that had been established after previous medical atrocities. When the experiment was finally exposed, officials initially defended it as valuable scientific research that had contributed important medical knowledge. They claimed the subjects had volunteered and understood what they were participating in. Both justifications were completely false. The men had been systematically deceived from recruitment through 40 years of monitoring. The conspiracy theory that government medical researchers were conducting unethical experiments on vulnerable populations was proven absolutely correct. The study was racist in conception and execution, deliberately targeting an impoverished community that officials believed wouldn't resist or complain about mistreatment. The exposure led to new regulations governing human experimentation, but the damage was permanent. An entire community's suspicions about medical racism had been validated through documented evidence of systematic abuse. The paranoid conspiracy theory was official government policy carried out by respected medical institutions for nearly half a century. What makes this medical conspiracy particularly devastating is how long it continued after effective treatment became standard medical practice. For nearly 30 years after medication could have completely cured the condition, researchers deliberately withheld treatment while watching subjects suffer and die. They turned human beings into laboratory animals for the sake of scientific observation. The study's exposure vindicated every conspiracy theory about medical exploitation of marginalized communities. It demonstrated that prestigious medical institutions could conduct horrifyingly unethical research with government funding and official approval. When conspiracy theorists from affected communities warned about being used as experimental subjects, they weren't being paranoid. They were documenting systematic abuse. The sugar manipulation of nutrition science. The sugar industry's manipulation of nutrition science represents another corporate conspiracy that seemed too coordinated to be believable. For decades, public health experts blamed dietary fat and cholesterol for heart disease, while treating sugar as relatively harmless. Official nutrition guidelines emphasized low-fat diets that were often loaded with sugar. People who suggested sugar was the real culprit behind health epidemics were dismissed as conspiracy theorists promoting dangerous high-fat diets. The conspiracy theory was elegantly simple. Sugar manufacturers were corrupting nutrition research to protect their profits. They were funding biased studies, paying scientists to reach predetermined conclusions, and manipulating government dietary recommendations. Mainstream nutritionists ridiculed these claims as conspiracy theories promoted by diet extremists who didn't understand legitimate scientific research. Official dietary guidelines remained consistent for decades. Saturated fat caused heart disease. Sugar was just empty calories that contributed to weight gain, but wasn't particularly dangerous. Public health campaigns urged people to avoid fat while largely ignoring sugar consumption. Food manufacturers created thousands of low-fat products that replaced fat with sugar and marketed them as healthy alternatives. The truth emerged when researchers uncovered internal sugar industry documents from the 1960s. These papers revealed a calculated conspiracy to manipulate nutrition science and public health policy for commercial benefit. The documents showed that sugar manufacturers had paid prominent scientists to publish research reviews that minimized evidence linking sugar to heart disease while emphasizing evidence against dietary fat. The industry-funded research wasn't objective science seeking truth. It was paid advocacy designed to produce specific conclusions that protected sugar sales. Scientists had been given explicit instructions about what conclusions to reach. Industry executives reviewed draft papers before publication to ensure they served commercial interests rather than public health. More documents revealed the comprehensive scope of the manipulation. Sugar manufacturers funded research programs specifically designed to produce results favorable to sugar consumption. They paid scientists to attack independent research showing sugar's harmful effects. They created front organizations that appeared to be independent health groups but actually promoted industry messaging. Industry executives discussed strategies for countering negative attitudes toward sugar consumption. Their approach involved funding research that questioned sugar's role in disease, while simultaneously promoting research that implicated other dietary components. They specifically targeted influential scientists and prestigious institutions, offering research funding with implicit expectations about results. The conspiracy extended beyond simply funding favorable research. When independent studies showed sugar caused health problems, the industry worked systematically to prevent publication. They funded contradictory studies designed to create scientific doubt. They launched personal attacks against researchers whose findings threatened sugar profits. One scientist who published concerning research about sugar's health effects found his work viciously criticized by industry-funded researchers. His future research funding mysteriously disappeared. Other scientists observed this treatment and understood the consequences of producing research that threatened sugar industry interests. The industry also manipulated dental health research when evidence clearly showed sugar consumption caused tooth decay. Rather than accepting responsibility, sugar manufacturers funded research emphasizing toothbrushing and fluoride treatments as solutions. They successfully deflected attention from sugar consumption to oral hygiene practices that didn't threaten their sales. The conspiracy's impact on public health was enormous and lasting. For decades, official dietary recommendations were based on science that had been secretly corrupted by industry funding. Millions of people followed nutritional advice that protected sugar industry profits rather than promoting optimal health outcomes. The obesity and diabetes epidemics that emerged during this period were directly connected to dietary guidelines influenced by sugar industry manipulation. People reduced fat consumption while increasing sugar intake, exactly as the industry had intended through their systematic corruption of nutrition science. What vindicated the conspiracy theorists most completely was documentation of deliberate manipulation rather than simple bias. This wasn't just industry funding creating unconscious research bias. It was explicit pay-for-conclusions arrangements where scientists were hired to reach specific findings regardless of evidence. The sugar industry conspiracy proved that nutrition science could be systematically corrupted through strategic funding. It demonstrated that prestigious scientists at elite institutions could be purchased to promote commercial interests over public health. The conspiracy theorists who questioned official dietary guidelines and suggested sugar was causing health epidemics were absolutely correct. The COINTELPRO, the Federal Bureau of Investigation's targeting of political activists, represents one of the most extensively documented government conspiracies against American citizens. For 15 years, federal agents conducted an illegal domestic counterintelligence program that systematically violated constitutional rights, infiltrated peaceful organizations, incited violence to discredit social movements, and even assassinated civil rights leaders. The program officially operated from 1956 to 1971, though evidence suggests similar techniques continued under different names for decades afterward. Targets included civil rights organizations, anti-war activists, indigenous rights groups, women's liberation movements, and essentially anyone federal authorities deemed subversive. This category expanded to include journalists, lawyers, religious leaders, and elected officials who questioned government policies. The program's existence was discovered accidentally when activists broke into a regional FBI office and stole classified documents. What they found was shocking evidence of systematic harassment, psychological warfare, and illegal surveillance conducted against American citizens exercising their constitutional rights. Federal agents didn't simply monitor political organizations. They actively worked to destroy activist movements through infiltration, disruption, and violence. Against one prominent civil rights organization, FBI tactics were particularly vicious. Agents sent anonymous letters claiming members were government informants, sparking violent confrontations that resulted in deaths. Most notoriously, federal agents provided local police with detailed floor plans of a leader's apartment and allegedly drugged his drink before a pre-dawn raid that killed him while he slept. The assassination was conducted with federal coordination and planning, then covered up as justified police action against armed criminals. The FBI's campaign against the civil rights movement exemplified the program's systematic cruelty. Agents installed surveillance devices in hotel rooms, recorded private conversations, and sent anonymous letters along with audio tapes of allegedly compromising material urging a prominent leader to commit suicide. The letter was mailed just weeks before he was scheduled to receive international recognition for his peace advocacy. Against anti-war movements, federal agents infiltrated organizations and actively encouraged illegal activities. They provided weapons and explosives to create criminal cases against activists. In many instances, the government infiltrators were the only people in peace organizations suggesting violent tactics. They manufactured the very criminality they claimed to be investigating. When the program was exposed through the stolen documents, FBI leadership initially denied its existence entirely. Faced with documentary evidence, officials eventually admitted to certain activities, but claimed they were necessary responses to communist infiltration and domestic terrorism threats. The official position became acknowledgement that the program had existed but assurance that it was completely terminated in 1971. This promise was deliberately false. Declassified documents from subsequent decades showed identical techniques continued under different program names and bureaucratic structures. Later administrations used FBI resources to target opponents using the same tactics of infiltration, surveillance, and disruption. After major terrorist attacks, federal agencies admitted to infiltrating anti-war and environmental groups using methods identical to the supposedly terminated program. No federal agents were ever prosecuted for constitutional violations. No victims received compensation for decades of systematic harassment. The government's position remained that these were overzealous but well-intentioned efforts that had been corrected through administrative reforms. The documented evidence tells a different story of a government agency that systematically violated constitutional principles, worked to suppress democratic participation, and faced no meaningful accountability for criminal behavior conducted against American citizens. The climate change denial. Climate change denial represents perhaps the most consequential corporate conspiracy of modern times. For decades, environmental scientists and activists claimed that fossil fuel companies possessed definitive evidence that their products were causing dangerous climate change, but were deliberately hiding this knowledge to protect their profits. The industry responded with coordinated outrage, dismissing these accusations as conspiracy theories promoted by anti-business extremists who wanted to destroy industrial civilization. Oil companies funded extensive research questioning climate science, promoted scientists who denied climate change was occurring, and insisted they were simply following objective scientific evidence wherever it led. The truth began emerging when investigative journalists obtained internal documents from major oil companies. These papers told a devastating story of systematic deception spanning more than 4 decades. As early as the late 1970s, company scientists had concluded that burning fossil fuels would cause significant global warming with potentially catastrophic consequences. Internal research papers accurately predicted temperature increases, polar ice melting, and sea level rise decades before these changes became observable. The science was definitive, and company leadership was thoroughly informed about climate risks. Rather than warning the public or adjusting business practices, companies made calculated decisions to suppress evidence and promote doubt about climate science. While their internal scientists confirmed climate change was real and dangerous, their public messaging categorically denied it. The companies developed coordinated strategies to combat climate science and policy. They funded research designed to cast doubt on climate evidence. They created and funded organizations that appeared independent but promoted climate denial messaging. Company executives paid scientists to publish papers questioning climate change in academic journals. They lobbied governments extensively to block climate policies. All of this deception occurred while knowing their own research proved climate change was real and caused by fossil fuel combustion. One particularly damning internal memorandum discussed corporate strategy for responding to growing public concern about climate change. The document acknowledged that climate change was real and fossil fuels were the primary cause, but recommended public relations campaigns emphasizing uncertainty in climate science to prevent policy responses. More documents revealed sophisticated climate modeling capabilities that companies used internally while publicly denying climate change. These models accurately predicted warming decades in advance. Companies used this information to protect their own infrastructure from climate impacts while denying those same impacts were occurring. The conspiracy extended across the entire fossil fuel industry through trade associations that coordinated climate denial campaigns. Multiple companies shared strategies for combating climate science and policy. They collectively funded front groups that promoted climate denial while concealing industry financing. Companies studied tobacco industry tactics for manufacturing scientific doubt and adapted them for climate denial. They specifically sought to create public impressions that climate science was unsettled and controversial, even though their own scientists knew it wasn't. Industry-funded organizations launched systematic campaigns to discredit climate researchers whose work confirmed fossil fuel dangers. They questioned methodologies, demanded data to attack studies, and created public controversies designed to undermine scientific credibility. The goal was silencing research that threatened fossil fuel profits. What makes this conspiracy particularly devastating is its global consequences. While oil companies deliberately deceived the public about climate change, the world passed critical thresholds for preventing catastrophic impacts. Decades were lost to industry-manufactured doubt about scientific evidence. The conspiracy wasn't simply about protecting profits. It involved sacrificing human civilization's future for short-term financial gain. Every year of delay in addressing climate change was a victory for industry deception over scientific truth. We've covered 9 mind-blowing conspiracy theories that turned out to be absolutely true. Before we get to the final story, do me a favor and hit that like button if this video has opened your eyes to how often we've been deceived. And make sure you're subscribed, because we're always uncovering hidden truths like these. Now, let's get to our final story. The weather modification. Weather modification programs represent another conspiracy theory that seemed too fantastic to believe until declassified military documents confirmed extensive government experimentation with atmospheric manipulation. For decades, people claimed aircraft were deliberately spraying chemicals to alter weather patterns, control rainfall, and modify storm systems. These claims were universally ridiculed as chemtrail conspiracy theories promoted by people who didn't understand basic atmospheric science. Skeptics insisted that unusual cloud formations were simply normal aircraft contrails consisting of ice crystals. Weather modification on any significant scale was considered scientifically impossible. The reality was far more extensive than conspiracy theorists had imagined. Weather modification programs had existed since the 1940s using techniques like cloud seeding, which involves dispersing chemicals into clouds to stimulate precipitation. Governments and private companies had been using these methods regularly for decades. What remained hidden was military application of weather modification technology. Declassified documents revealed that during major military conflicts, armed forces had conducted weather modification operations for years. They seeded clouds to increase rainfall in enemy territory, attempting to make supply routes impassable during critical seasons. When rumors circulated about military weather control programs, officials categorically denied their existence. Only after congressional investigations and international pressure did military leadership admit they had been conducting weather modification in combat zones for years. The revelations forced official acknowledgement that weather modification was not only possible, but had been actively used as a military tactic. Congressional hearings examined the programs in detail. International concern about weather warfare led to treaties specifically banning military weather modification. But the conspiracy extended far beyond military applications. Documents revealed extensive research into climate engineering techniques, including spraying particles into upper atmospheric layers to reflect sunlight, creating artificial cloud formations, and schemes to alter global atmospheric circulation patterns. These weren't theoretical research papers. They described funded government programs investigating whether climate could be modified on regional or global scales. Some experiments had actually been conducted without public knowledge or consent. Government agencies had investigated atmospheric engineering for decades, studying whether weather and climate could be deliberately modified through technological intervention. Various substances had been released into the atmosphere to study dispersion patterns and evaluate potential weather modification applications. One documented program involved releasing chemical compounds into upper atmospheric layers to study wind patterns. The releases created visible cloud formations that were observed by people on the ground. Individuals who saw unusual cloud formations and suspected government experiments were dismissed as conspiracy theorists, but declassified documents proved their observations were accurate. Research documents revealed military interest in weather modification as strategic capability. Concepts under serious study included enhancing storm systems, directing hurricane paths, and creating or dispersing fog formations for tactical advantage. These weren't science fiction scenarios, but actively researched military applications. The most controversial revelations involved geoengineering research programs studying how to deliberately modify Earth's climate system. Scientists funded by government agencies were investigating techniques for countering climate change through technological intervention, often with minimal public disclosure or democratic oversight. The conspiracy theorists who claimed governments were conducting secret atmospheric experiments were essentially vindicated. While the reality was more nuanced than simple chemtrail theories, the core concern about undisclosed atmospheric manipulation was completely accurate. What made this vindication particularly significant was how conspiracy theory labels were used to prevent legitimate public discussion. Anyone expressing concern about atmospheric experiments was dismissed as a chemtrail believer and ridiculed. This prevented serious democratic engagement with real weather modification programs that were actually occurring. These 10 proven conspiracies demonstrate that paranoid theories aren't always wrong. Sometimes government agencies do conduct illegal surveillance and experimentation. Sometimes corporations deliberately hide evidence of harm. Sometimes officials systematically lie to protect institutional interests. The pattern across these cases is remarkably consistent. Truth emerged not through official transparency, but through leaked documents, brave whistleblowers, investigative journalism, and legal proceedings that forced evidence into public view. Authorities fought disclosure until concealment became impossible, then minimized revelations and claimed reforms had been implemented. By the time truth emerged, years or decades had passed. Those who tried to expose these conspiracies had often been professionally destroyed, personally attacked, and dismissed as paranoid conspiracy theorists. The label itself became a weapon to silence inconvenient questions and protect powerful interests from scrutiny. What makes these vindicated conspiracies particularly unsettling is how they reveal the mechanics of institutional deception. The methods used to conceal these proven conspiracies, classification of documents, systematic denial of evidence, personal attacks on critics, and destruction of incriminating materials, are identical to techniques employed today against current conspiracy theories. This creates a profound dilemma for anyone trying to distinguish between legitimate concerns and unfounded speculation. How do we separate valid conspiracy theories from false ones when the suppression tactics remain constant across decades? These historical cases suggest an uncomfortable answer. We often cannot make that distinction until internal documents leak, whistleblowers risk everything to reveal truth, or legal proceedings force evidence into public view. By that time, the conspiracies have usually achieved their intended goals. The surveillance programs have collected years of data. The harmful products have generated enormous profits. The illegal operations have accomplished their objectives. The cover-ups have protected those responsible from accountability. The conspiracies that eventually get proven represent only the visible portion of institutional deception. These are cases where evidence survived deliberate destruction efforts, where whistleblowers successfully came forward despite threats and intimidation, where documents were inadvertently preserved despite systematic elimination attempts. How many other conspiracies remain permanently hidden because records were successfully destroyed, whistleblowers were effectively silenced, and evidence was completely controlled? The proven cases likely represent just a fraction of actual institutional misconduct that occurs beyond public awareness. Perhaps most disturbing is discovering that the conspiracy theories proven correct weren't obscure fringe beliefs held by isolated individuals. Many involved widespread public suspicions that were systematically dismissed by authorities and media outlets. Entire communities knew they were being surveilled, experimented upon, or deceived, but their concerns were ridiculed as paranoid delusions. The tobacco industry conspiracy affected millions of smokers who suspected companies were hiding health dangers. The medical experimentation conspiracy was suspected by communities that were actually being used as test subjects. The surveillance conspiracy was predicted by privacy advocates who understood technological capabilities. The environmental conspiracy was identified by scientists who recognized corporate manipulation of research. In each case, the people closest to the harmful activities, those most directly affected by the conspiracies, were among the first to recognize what was happening. Their warnings were dismissed not because evidence was lacking, but because acknowledging their concerns would have threatened powerful interests. This pattern suggests that conspiracy theories emerging from affected communities deserve serious consideration rather than automatic dismissal. When people claim they're being surveilled, poisoned, experimented upon, or systematically deceived, history shows these concerns are sometimes completely accurate. The institutional response to proven conspiracies also reveals telling patterns. Officials rarely admit wrongdoing voluntarily. They deny everything until evidence becomes undeniable, then minimize the scope while claiming reforms have been implemented. Responsibility is distributed across so many people and agencies that no individual faces meaningful consequences. The systematic nature of these deceptions required coordination across multiple institutions. Government agencies, corporations, academic institutions, and media organizations all participated in maintaining false narratives. This wasn't the work of isolated bad actors, but coordinated efforts involving hundreds or thousands of people. Yet when exposed, the conspiracies are typically portrayed as aberrations, temporary failures of oversight that have been corrected through policy changes. The institutional systems that enabled the deception remain largely unchanged. The same agencies that conducted illegal surveillance continue operating with expanded authorities. The same regulatory bodies that failed to prevent corporate deception continue overseeing those industries. The people who exposed these conspiracies often paid severe personal costs for their courage. Whistleblowers faced prosecution, exile, and financial ruin. Journalists were attacked and discredited. Scientists lost funding and career opportunities. Activists were surveilled, harassed, and sometimes killed. Meanwhile, those who perpetrated the conspiracies rarely faced comparable consequences. Government officials who authorized illegal programs received promotions or comfortable retirements. Corporate executives who hid evidence of harm collected enormous bonuses and golden parachutes. The incentive structure consistently rewards deception while punishing truth-telling. This asymmetry explains why similar conspiracies continue emerging despite periodic exposures. The potential rewards for successful deception far exceed the likely costs of being caught. Billion-dollar profits justify million-dollar legal settlements. Career advancement justifies ethical compromises. Institutional loyalty justifies public deception. The proven conspiracies also demonstrate how classification systems and secrecy laws enable systematic wrongdoing. Many of these deceptions were maintained for decades through official secrecy that prevented public examination. Documents were classified not to protect national security, but to conceal criminal activity and institutional misconduct. When information is classified, public debate becomes impossible. Critics can be dismissed as conspiracy theorists who lack access to classified information, even when their theories are completely accurate. The classification system becomes a tool for protecting institutional interests rather than legitimate security concerns. The role of media outlets in these conspiracies deserves particular attention. In most cases, mainstream media initially accepted official narratives and dismissed conspiracy theories as fringe beliefs. Investigative journalism that eventually exposed the truth often came from independent reporters or smaller publications willing to challenge powerful interests. This suggests that media consolidation and corporate influence may systematically bias coverage toward protecting established interests. When media companies depend on government access and corporate advertising, they have incentives to avoid stories that might threaten those relationships. The Internet has fundamentally changed how conspiracy theories spread and how evidence gets preserved. Digital communications create permanent records that are harder to destroy than paper documents. Social media allows rapid sharing of information that bypasses traditional gatekeepers. Encrypted communications make it easier for whistleblowers to contact journalists safely. But these same technologies also make it easier to spread false information and create sophisticated disinformation campaigns. The challenge of distinguishing between legitimate conspiracy theories and deliberate misinformation has become more complex in the digital age. The historical record suggests several indicators that might help identify conspiracy theories worth serious investigation. Theories that emerge from communities directly affected by alleged conspiracies deserve particular attention. Concerns raised by insiders with relevant expertise should be carefully examined. Claims that can be tested through document requests or investigative journalism merit investigation. Conversely, theories that rely entirely on speculation without testable claims, that require massive coordination among unconnected groups, or that serve obvious political or commercial purposes should be viewed with skepticism. But even these criteria aren't foolproof, since some proven conspiracies seemed impossible until evidence emerged. The 10 cases examined here share another crucial characteristic. They all involve systematic efforts to prevent public awareness and democratic oversight of institutional activities. The conspiracies weren't just about hiding specific wrongdoing, but about maintaining systems that enabled ongoing misconduct without accountability. This suggests that conspiracy theories challenging institutional transparency and democratic accountability deserve serious consideration, regardless of how implausible they might initially appear. When institutions resist public scrutiny, refuse to release information, or attack critics rather than addressing their concerns, history shows these responses often indicate actual wrongdoing. The proven conspiracies also reveal how institutional cultures develop that normalize unethical behavior. In each case, large numbers of people participated in maintaining deceptions that harmed others. They weren't necessarily evil individuals, but people working within systems that rewarded compliance and punished dissent. Understanding how ordinary people become complicit in systematic deception is crucial for preventing future conspiracies. It requires examining the incentive structures, cultural norms, and organizational pressures that enable institutional misconduct to continue across decades. The psychological impact of discovering that respected institutions have systematically deceived the public cannot be underestimated. When people learn that government agencies, medical authorities, and scientific institutions have lied about fundamental issues affecting their lives, it undermines trust in all institutional authority. This erosion of institutional credibility creates fertile ground for both legitimate conspiracy theories and false ones. When people discover they've been deceived about surveillance programs, medical experiments, and environmental dangers, they become more receptive to claims about other potential deceptions, regardless of evidence. The challenge for democratic societies is maintaining healthy skepticism toward institutional claims while avoiding paranoid rejection of all institutional knowledge. This requires institutions to earn public trust through transparency, accountability, and consistent honesty, rather than demanding trust based on authority alone. The 10 conspiracy theories examined here were proven through concrete evidence, leaked documents, whistleblower testimonies, and investigative journalism that forced truth into public view. They demonstrate that systematic institutional deception is not just theoretical possibility, but documented historical reality. If this video was eye-opening to you, then you have to check out our last video on the secret scandals the billionaires keep that get covered up globally. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with a friend. Don't keep these discoveries as a secret to yourself. Until next time, when we find out how.